The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, when Raphael glanced sideways at his wife Luisa, who was driving down the deserted road. Their children, Eduardo and Carolina, were dozing in the back seat, exhausted after hours of travel. They had been planning this weekend getaway for days, a time to disconnect, escape the stress of the city, and enjoy the fresh air at their quiet ranch, located in the countryside, far from everything. "I think we should stop at the next inn," Raphael said calmly, gently stroking the steering wheel. "We're a few hours away from the ranch, but the kids seem exhausted." Luisa nodded without taking her eyes off the road. She didn't argue much with Raphael. She had learned to read his silent signals and, although she didn't always agree, she preferred to maintain harmony rather than create friction. The inn appeared a few kilometers ahead, a small cozy building with warm lights illuminating the exterior. It seemed perfect for resting for a few hours before continuing the trip. As they parked the car, the children slowly woke up, yawning and stretching. "Are we there yet?" Carolina asked, rubbing her eyes. "Not yet, honey," Raphael responded with a calm smile. "We're going to rest here for a bit and continue tomorrow." They entered the inn, where the atmosphere was cozy and familiar. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. While Luisa handled the check-in, Raphael glanced around, observing the few guests who were there. That's when he noticed Ricardo and Amanda, a friendly-looking couple sitting at a nearby table, chatting with each other, while their daughter Livia, the same age as Carolina, played with a small doll. Raphael, always sociable, didn't take long to approach them. "Excuse me," he said in his usual polite tone, "I couldn't help but notice you're traveling too. My family and I are on a little getaway, are you as well?" Ricardo looked up, surprised by the interruption, but soon smiled, charmed by Raphael's natural charisma. "Yes, we decided to get out of the city for a bit. It's hard to find time with work and everything else," Ricardo replied, extending his hand for a handshake. Introductions didn't take long. Amanda, though more reserved than her husband, also smiled kindly, and soon the two families were sitting together, sharing stories about their lives and laughing easily. Livia and Carolina quickly found common interests and started playing together while Eduardo, more shy, watched from a distance. The night advanced as the two families continued chatting. Raphael mentioned his ranch, an isolated property surrounded by nature. "It's a quiet place, perfect for disconnecting from the world," Raphael said, a glimmer of enthusiasm in his eyes. "You should visit us sometime. We have plenty of space, and it would be a pleasure to host you." Amanda exchanged a glance with Ricardo, who seemed intrigued by the idea. The offer sounded tempting, especially after the connection they had made that night. However, deep down, Amanda felt a slight uneasiness. There was something about Raphael, a kindness that seemed too perfect, a calmness that felt calculated. But Ricardo, always the optimist, was excited about the idea. "That sounds great," Ricardo said. "We'd love to visit." "Right, Amanda?" She hesitated for a second before nodding. "Sure, it would be nice to break out of the routine," she responded, although her tone carried a slight doubt that didn't go unnoticed by Raphael. As the conversation continued, Luisa watched silently, as she often did. She knew how charming Raphael could be, how he could make anyone feel comfortable around him. But she also knew what came next, what followed after the initial charm. She chose not to intervene, keeping her polite and calm smile while her heart raced in her chest. Carolina, exhausted from playing so much, approached her father, resting her head on his lap. "Daddy, can we go to bed?" she whispered, her eyes already closing. "Of course, honey," Raphael responded, stroking her hair. "It's time." They said their goodbyes to Ricardo, Amanda, and Livia, with a promise that they would meet again soon. Raphael insisted that they visit the following weekend, a plan that seemed sealed with a firm handshake between the two men. However, as the family separated, half-asleep Carolina mumbled something that made Raphael momentarily alert. "Daddy, I saw something strange." "What was it, honey?" Raphael asked, though he didn't show too much interest. "I saw you looking at that man, in a strange way," Carolina said, her voice soft and sleepy. Raphael smiled softly and tucked her into bed in their room at the inn. "You must have imagined it, sweetheart. Rest." But as Carolina settled into bed, Raphael stayed a moment longer standing by the window, watching the shadows cast under the faint moonlight. His gaze hardened for a brief instant, before the mask of tranquility, as always, returned to his face. The weekend at the ranch promised to be memorable. The sound of wheels on gravel announced their arrival at the ranch. It was a fresh, sunny morning, and the vast stretch of green field surrounding Raphael's property extended as far as the eye could see. Ricardo, Amanda, and Livia looked around in awe as they stepped out of the car, impressed by the sheer size of the place. "Wow, this is huge!" Ricardo exclaimed with a smile. "I didn't expect it to be this big." Raphael, ever the charmer, smiled modestly. "We like the space," he said, patting Ricardo on the back. "It's a good place to disconnect, like I told you. Here, there's nothing but silence and nature." Luisa, who had been busy unloading some bags from the car, approached with Carolina and Eduardo, who ran into the fields as soon as their feet touched the ground. Livia, excited by the open space, joined them in their play. "Honestly, Raphael, this place is beautiful," Amanda said, admiring the main house, a colonial-style building with large windows and a spacious porch that invited relaxation. "I'm surprised at how isolated it is. It's so different from the city." Raphael nodded, pleased with her reaction. "That's the point," he replied. "Here, you can forget everything. No noise, no traffic, just peace. And believe me, when you're here for a few days, you'll feel how the stress of daily life fades away." As Raphael and Ricardo chatted about the beauty of the ranch and what awaited them for the weekend, Amanda began to notice something peculiar in the air. There was an unusual calm, a silence that didn't seem natural. There were no bird songs, not even the rustling of branches in the wind. Something about that stillness made her feel uneasy, but she tried not to show it. "Let's go inside," Luisa suggested, finally breaking her silence. "I'll show you your rooms." The inside of the house was as impressive as the outside. Spacious rooms, decorated with antique furniture and heavy curtains that seemed to have hung there for centuries. The air smelled of old wood, and although the place was grand, there was something about the atmosphere that felt a bit oppressive to Amanda. They climbed a creaky wooden staircase that led to the second-floor bedrooms. As they walked, Amanda couldn't help but notice that some doors were locked. Her curiosity was piqued, but she decided not to ask about it just yet. "This is where you'll be staying," Luisa said, opening the door to a spacious room with a view of the fields. "I hope you like it." "It's perfect, thank you," Amanda responded with a polite smile, though her mind was still occupied with small details she couldn't ignore: the locks on the doors, the excessive silence, and, was it her imagination, or was the house colder than it should be? Ricardo, on the other hand, was completely at ease, immediately relaxing in a large armchair next to the window. "This place is amazing," he said, stretching. "I think this is just what we needed." Amanda nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Maybe it was just the fact that they were in an unfamiliar place, or maybe she was projecting her own fears. She decided not to say anything for now. She didn't want to ruin Ricardo's experience with her unfounded worries. They spent the afternoon exploring the ranch. Raphael showed them the stables, where a few horses grazed peacefully. The children had a great time running and playing in the wide open spaces. Everything seemed perfect, but Amanda couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. Every time she turned around, she had the strange sensation that someone was watching them. She looked around, but saw no one, just the vast, empty field. Carolina, while playing with Livia, also began to feel that strange sensation. From time to time, she glanced at the house and thought she saw a figure in one of the upstairs windows. But every time she blinked or looked closer, the figure disappeared, as if it had been a figment of her imagination. "Did you see that?" Carolina asked, stopping abruptly and staring at the house. "See what?" Livia responded, following the direction of her gaze. "There, in the window," Carolina pointed with her finger, but there was nothing there anymore. "I don't see anything," Livia shrugged. "You're imagining things." Carolina frowned, unsure. Maybe she was tired, or maybe she was letting the atmosphere of the house affect her. Back at the house, while Luisa prepared something to eat, Raphael and Ricardo sat on the terrace with a couple of beers, enjoying the view. "So, tell me, how's business going?" Raphael asked, suddenly interested in Ricardo's professional life. "Oh, fine, always busy," Ricardo replied with a smile. "Sometimes it's hard to disconnect, even in places like this." "Yeah, it's tough to get away from work, especially when you've got a family to take care of," Raphael said, watching Ricardo with a more intense gaze than usual. "Sometimes, you have to make tough decisions to secure the future, don't you think?" Ricardo looked at him, a little surprised by the seriousness in Raphael's tone, but nodded. "Yes, I suppose so," he responded. Although I try not to think too much about the future. I prefer to enjoy the present. Raphael smiled, but there was something about his smile that made Ricardo feel a little uneasy. It was almost as if there was a second layer behind those words, something unsaid but implied. As the afternoon wore on, Amanda decided to take a walk around the house. She was feeling restless and wanted to clear her mind. As she passed one of the locked doors on the second floor, she heard a faint noise on the other side. She froze in place. There was no one else in that part of the house, or at least that's what she thought. She stepped closer, trying to listen better, but the sound disappeared as quickly as it had started. Her heart pounded in her chest. What had that been? She quickly decided to walk away, telling herself it had probably been the creaking of the old wood or the wind passing through the windows. However, when she found herself with Luisa again in the kitchen, she couldn't resist asking a question. I noticed that some doors are locked. Is there any particular reason for that? Luisa paused for a second before responding, and Amanda noticed a small tension in her face. Oh, yes, they're just rooms we don't use, old, full of junk, Luisa replied with a tight smile. There's no need to worry about them. Amanda tried to smile back, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And as the night began to fall over the ranch, that sense of unease only grew stronger. Darkness had completely fallen over the ranch, and a sense of unease had settled over Amanda. The day's events seemed normal on the surface, but there was something underneath, a silent tension that she couldn't ignore. The noise she had heard behind that locked door, the inexplicable coldness of the house, and the way Luisa had reacted when she asked about the locked rooms, it all added to the feeling that something was off. After dinner, Raphael and Ricardo continued talking on the terrace, but Amanda decided to retire early. She pretended to be tired from the trip, although in reality, she wanted to explore the house more thoroughly without Raphael's presence. Livia and Carolina were already in bed, and Eduardo entertained himself with his phone, seemingly indifferent to the atmosphere that so disturbed his mother. As she climbed the stairs to the second floor, Amanda stopped in front of the locked doors again. The silence in that part of the house was absolute, except for the faint creaking of the wood beneath her feet. She approached the first door, the same one where she had heard that strange noise earlier. This time, there was no sound. With a sigh, she turned away, but just as she was about to leave, a small click sounded behind her. She froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she turned her head toward the door. The doorknob was moving. Someone or something was inside. Instinctively stepping back, Amanda retreated a few steps, but the door didn't open. The knob stopped moving, and the silence returned. For a moment, she thought about screaming or calling for Ricardo, but something inside her told her not to, not yet. Raphael had always been charming, but what if she was wrong? What if behind that friendly facade was something much darker? She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, and decided she needed answers. She went downstairs, intending to talk to Luisa alone. She found her in the kitchen, quietly washing dishes, her face tense. Amanda entered slowly, without making much noise, and leaned against the counter. Luisa, can I ask you something? Amanda began, trying to sound as relaxed as possible. Luisa didn't look up, but nodded slowly. Of course, Amanda. What is it? Amanda carefully considered how to phrase the question. She didn't want to sound paranoid, but at the same time, she needed to know what was going on. Today, when I mentioned the locked doors, Amanda started. I noticed you seemed a bit uncomfortable. Is it just my imagination, or is there something more going on in this house that you're not telling me? Luisa paused for a moment, her hand frozen on a plate. The silence stretched on, and Amanda thought maybe she had gone too far, that Luisa wouldn't say anything. But then, Luisa set the plate in the sink and slowly turned to face her. There was a mix of fear and resignation in her eyes. Amanda, there are things that are better left unknown, she said in a low voice, almost pleading. Things that are better left unquestioned. Amanda's heart raced. She knew there was more. Something much more sinister. But before she could say anything, Luisa added, Please, trust me. Don't ask questions. Enjoy the weekend and leave when the time comes. It's best for everyone. Amanda wasn't willing to accept that answer. She frowned, ready to push further. Luisa, I can't ignore what I've seen. I can't just pretend nothing's happening when it's clear there's something very strange going on here. Please, tell me the truth. Luisa stared at her, as if she were fighting an internal battle. Finally, she lowered her gaze and murmured, It's for your safety, Amanda. The less you know, the safer it will be for you and your family. Amanda felt a wave of cold wash over her body. Something was terribly wrong, and Luisa's vague warning only confirmed it. Safety? Amanda asked, her voice trembling. What are you talking about? But before Luisa could respond, a loud noise from outside shattered the tense silence. It was the sound of something falling or breaking in the yard. Both women looked at each other, wide-eyed. What was that? Amanda asked, her heart in her throat. I don't know, Luisa responded nervously. I'll go check. Luisa rushed out of the kitchen, and Amanda followed closely behind. When they reached the porch, they saw Rafael and Ricardo quickly getting up from their chairs, staring toward the garden. Eduardo and the girls, who had been inside, ran out behind Amanda, curious about the noise. What happened? Ricardo asked, frowning. I'm not sure, Rafael responded, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the garden. It seemed to come from the back of the house. Amanda felt a chill run down her spine. Everything about this house was wrong. Something inside her told her that whatever had made that noise wasn't good. Rafael grabbed a flashlight and started walking toward the back of the house, with Ricardo following. Amanda and Luisa stayed on the porch, watching in silence. The girls wanted to follow their fathers, but Amanda stopped them. No, stay here. It's better to wait, she said, though deep down, she wasn't sure if she really wanted them to wait. Several minutes passed before Rafael and Ricardo returned. Both had serious expressions, but they tried to remain calm. It was probably just an animal, Rafael said, with a reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes. Nothing to worry about. But Amanda wasn't convinced. Something in her gut told her that whatever had happened wasn't as innocent as Rafael wanted them to believe. That night, as everyone retired to their rooms, Amanda couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart racing and her nerves on edge. Eduardo, who slept in the room next door, couldn't sleep either. As he scrolled through his phone, he remembered the photos he had seen in the stables, old, faded, showing other families who had stayed there. Some were smiling, others were not. And the most unsettling thing, some of those photos were partially burned, as if someone had tried to erase something from them. With that image etched in his mind, Eduardo finally decided that the next day, he would investigate further. Something was wrong at this ranch, and he had to find out what it was. The morning dawned silent, as if the world around the ranch had stopped in its tracks. Amanda woke up feeling a persistent tension in her chest. The memory of the conversation with Luisa and the strange noise from the previous night kept hammering in her mind. Rafael and Ricardo had come back from checking the garden, saying it was just an animal, but Amanda wasn't so sure. She got up carefully, trying not to wake Livia, who was still sleeping deeply. As she headed to the kitchen to make coffee, she passed by the window and glanced out at the back garden. In the daylight, everything looked calmer, less threatening. But she knew appearances could be deceiving. At the breakfast table, Eduardo and Carolina were already awake. Rafael and Ricardo were chatting about the day's plans, but Amanda noticed that Luisa seemed distracted, as if her mind were elsewhere. When she poured her coffee, Amanda sat next to Eduardo, who was glued to his phone, but his expression revealed that something else was on his mind. Eduardo, are you okay? Amanda asked in a low voice, trying not to draw attention from the others. Eduardo nodded but didn't look up. Yes, Mom, I'm fine, he replied, but Amanda wasn't convinced. After breakfast, while everyone was preparing to explore more of the ranch, Eduardo approached his mother. He waited until the others were busy to speak. Mom, I couldn't sleep last night, he whispered. I kept thinking about something I saw yesterday in the stables. Amanda frowned, worried. What did you see? She asked, keeping her voice calm. There were some old photos, Eduardo explained, glancing toward the door to make sure no one was listening. Photos of other families that were here before, but some of them were burned, like someone wanted to get rid of them. Amanda's heart skipped a beat. What Eduardo was describing fit with her own suspicions, with a feeling that something sinister was lurking at the ranch. Are you sure? Amanda whispered. Eduardo nodded. Mom, there's something strange about this place. I can feel it. We need to do something. Amanda looked into her son's eyes and saw the seriousness in his expression. She knew Eduardo wasn't making this up. Rafael had always been charming, but Amanda couldn't ignore the signs. There was something much darker beneath that perfect facade. Listen, don't say anything to anyone for now, she told him, gently touching his arm. We need to be discreet. We'll investigate, but carefully. If we say anything now, we could be in danger. Eduardo nodded, though fear was already clear in his eyes. While the others went horseback riding around the ranch, Amanda and Eduardo decided to explore the house. They knew something was hidden there, something that Luisa didn't want them to find. They started with the locked rooms on the second floor. Amanda glanced down the stairs to make sure no one was following them, then turned the knob on one of the locked doors. This time there were no strange noises, but the door remained firmly locked. "Damn it," Amanda muttered, trying not to get frustrated. Eduardo looked around and noticed a small shelf next to the door. He moved it, and to his surprise, behind it he found a key. He stared at it, incredulous, and then handed it to his mother. "How did you know it was there?" Amanda asked. Eduardo shrugged. "I didn't. I just tried." Amanda took the key and, with a sigh, inserted it into the lock. She turned it slowly, and the door creaked open. What they found on the other side took their breath away. The room was filled with old boxes, papers scattered everywhere, and most disturbingly, more photos. But these weren't ordinary photos. They were images of people, families, captured in moments of fear or distress. Amanda slowly approached one of the boxes and saw names written on yellowed papers, all of them unknown. Who were these people? What had happened to them? "Mom, look at this," Eduardo said, pointing to a particular photo. It was a picture of a family, smiling, but there was something strange in the background. Amanda took the photo and looked closer. Behind the family, barely visible, was Raphael, watching them, with a smile that didn't seem friendly, but calculated, almost predatory. "Oh my God," Amanda whispered, her mind racing. This wasn't just an ordinary ranch. Something much darker had happened here, something that Raphael had meticulously hidden. The families in the photos weren't here for a simple weekend getaway. They had been brought here for a much more sinister reason. "We need to get out of here," Amanda whispered urgently. "This is dangerous, Eduardo. If Raphael finds out we know." "What about Dad? And the girls?" Eduardo asked, fear now completely visible in his eyes. Amanda swallowed hard. They couldn't just run. They needed a plan, but they also needed proof. "Listen, we're going to stay calm," she said. "We can't raise any suspicions. I'll talk to your father tonight, but for now, stay away from Raphael. Don't tell Livia or Carolina anything." Eduardo nodded, though the tension in his body was palpable. Before they could keep searching, they heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Amanda quickly shut the door to the room and replaced the key, just in time before Luisa appeared at the end of the hallway. "What are you doing up here?" Luisa asked, her voice colder than usual. Amanda forced a smile. "We were just exploring a bit," she replied calmly, though inside she could feel her heart racing. Luisa looked at them for a moment longer than necessary, then slowly nodded. "All right. It's time for lunch." Amanda and Eduardo followed her back to the kitchen, but Amanda knew it was time to act. What they had discovered was only the tip of the iceberg, and if they didn't leave soon, she feared they would be the next victims of Raphael's dark secret. The day moved slowly at the ranch, but for Amanda, time seemed to be speeding up. After the unsettling discovery in the locked room, her mind kept racing, searching for a way out of this situation. She knew they couldn't just escape without a plan. Raphael was cunning, always watching, always in control of everything that happened. If they tried something reckless, they could put themselves in serious danger. Eduardo, for his part, kept his distance from Raphael and Luisa, following his mother's instructions. He appeared calm, but Amanda could see the tension in his body, the fear he was trying to hide. She knew they couldn't stay in this situation much longer. They needed a way out, but how? After a tense lunch, during which Raphael had animatedly talked to Ricardo about investments and future projects, Amanda took advantage of a moment alone to approach her husband. Ricardo seemed completely oblivious to what was happening, charmed by the idea of doing business with Raphael. His calm and carefree smile contrasted with Amanda's growing anxiety. "Ricardo, we need to talk," she said quietly, taking his hand to lead him to a secluded corner of the house. "What's wrong?" he asked, frowning slightly as he noticed the seriousness in her expression. "There's something really strange about this house, something that isn't right," Amanda whispered, trying to keep her voice low so no one would overhear them. Ricardo let out a nervous laugh. "What are you talking about, Amanda? Raphael has been an incredible host, everything's fine. I think you're just a little stressed from the trip." Amanda shook her head, desperate to make him understand. "No, Ricardo. There are things you haven't seen. Eduardo and I found photos of other families who have been here, and some of those photos were burned, like someone was trying to hide them. There's something dark going on here, I can feel it." Ricardo looked at her, confused. "Photos? Amanda, that doesn't make any sense. Are you suggesting that Raphael is up to something bad? That's ridiculous." "It's not," Amanda exclaimed, raising her voice more than she had intended, but quickly lowering it when she realized. "Please, Ricardo, you have to trust me. Something is wrong here. I don't feel safe, and neither do the kids." Ricardo watched her for a moment, evaluating her words. Finally, he let out a sigh. "All right, Amanda," he said quietly. "I believe you. But we need proof. If we're going to confront Raphael or do anything, we can't act on just assumptions." Amanda nodded, relieved that at least Ricardo was listening to her. "I know. We're going to need proof, but we also have to be careful. If Raphael realizes we suspect something, we could be in danger." Ricardo frowned, as if he finally understood the seriousness of the situation. "Okay, we'll proceed cautiously. Have you thought about how to get out of here without raising suspicion?" Amanda shook her head. "Not yet. But we need to be ready. If we find something more, something we can use as evidence, then we can leave without Raphael suspecting." Their conversation was interrupted when they heard footsteps approaching. Raphael appeared in the doorway, his usual smile on his face. "Everything okay here?" he asked, looking at the couple with curiosity. Amanda and Ricardo forced themselves to smile. "Yes, everything's fine," Amanda replied, trying to sound casual. Raphael watched them for another moment before nodding and turning to leave. Once he was gone, Amanda let out a sigh of relief. She knew they had to act quickly. Later that day, while Livia and Carolina played in the field and Eduardo was distracted with his phone, Amanda seized the opportunity to return to the locked room. This time, she made sure that Raphael and Luisa were occupied. Ricardo offered to keep an eye on them while she searched more thoroughly. When she reached the door, she took the key hidden behind a shelf, her hands trembling. She knew what she was doing was dangerous, but she had no other choice. She needed more evidence. She entered the room and began to carefully go through the boxes and papers. There were old documents, names of people she didn't recognize, and most disturbingly, more photos of families. Some photos were intact, others burned or damaged. It was clear that Raphael had tried to hide something. Suddenly, she found a folder marked with a name she didn't recognize. She opened it and, to her horror, found a detailed record of bank transfers and property holdings under Raphael's name. The amounts of money were enormous, and each transaction included the names of the people who had been photographed in the images. These families had been victims of some sort of scam, stripped of their assets. Amanda felt a knot form in her stomach. This was what they needed. It was proof that something illegal and dangerous was happening. She took photos of the documents with her phone, trying to be as quick as possible. Before she could finish, she heard footsteps approaching. She quickly shut the folder and put it back in its place just as Luisa appeared in the doorway. Amanda's heart stopped for a second. "What are you doing in here?" Luisa asked, with a suspicious look on her face. Amanda forced herself to stay calm. "I was just looking for something, nothing important," she said, trying to sound casual. Luisa watched her for a long moment, as if deciding whether or not to believe her. Finally, she nodded slowly. "You should go back to the others. Raphael is wondering where you are." Amanda nodded, and with her heart pounding, she left the room. She knew things were about to get much more dangerous. They had the proof they needed, but now they had to figure out how to escape the ranch without Raphael or Luisa realizing what they knew. The sunset bathed the ranch in an orange light that seemed to accentuate the tense atmosphere between Amanda and Ricardo. After the discovery of the incriminating documents about Raphael, Amanda knew there was no time to lose. Now, every moment at the ranch felt dangerous, and her biggest concern was that Raphael or Luisa would realize what they knew. During dinner, Amanda could hardly concentrate. Every time Raphael spoke or Luisa looked at her, she felt a sharp pang of anxiety. Time was running out, and the only thing left was to decide the right moment to escape. Amanda and Ricardo had secretly discussed a plan earlier in the day, but they couldn't take any risks. They had to make sure the children were safe and that no one followed them when they left. "Raphael, I was thinking," Ricardo said, forcing a smile. Maybe we should leave early tomorrow morning. The drive back is long, and I want to avoid the city traffic. Raphael, who was cutting his steak, looked up and flashed his characteristic smile. So soon? He asked in a friendly tone, though Amanda noticed a slight stiffness in his expression. I thought you'd want to stay a little longer. There's still so much to see around here. Ricardo maintained his posture, trying to appear casual. It's tempting, but you know how life in the city is. Responsibilities are calling, he said with a forced laugh. Plus, the kids start school soon, and it would be good to have time to prepare. Amanda, sitting beside him, nodded silently, trying not to seem nervous. But she knew Raphael wasn't a fool. He was studying every move, every word. I understand, of course, Raphael said, though his tone wasn't as relaxed as before. Well, early tomorrow will be fine. But make sure you rest tonight. We wouldn't want you to have an accident on the way. Those last words sounded strangely ominous to Amanda, sending a chill down her spine. After dinner, while everyone retreated to their rooms, Amanda instructed Ricardo to keep Livia and Carolina occupied. Her goal was to make sure everything was ready for their departure in the morning. Eduardo, who had been part of the plan from the beginning, stayed awake, waiting for the moment to act. Mom, do you think Raphael suspects anything? Eduardo asked in a low voice as he helped Amanda pack some of their belongings without raising suspicion. Amanda nodded slightly, glancing toward the door. I think he's starting to suspect something, but I'm not sure how much he knows, she said, speaking quickly. We have to move fast. Tonight, as soon as everyone's asleep, we'll leave. Eduardo swallowed nervously. What if they stop us? Amanda turned to him, looking at him with a mix of determination and fear. They won't. You have to trust me. We can't stay even a minute longer than necessary. The plan was simple but risky. They would leave in the middle of the night, with all their belongings already packed in the car. They would pretend to leave early as they had said, but instead of waiting until morning, they would slip away while the ranch slept. As they prepared, Amanda couldn't help but think of the photographs she had seen, the happy families who had once been in the same position as them, smiling, unaware of the danger that surrounded them. She knew she couldn't let her family become another hidden story in that cursed house. The hours passed slowly, each minute feeling like a test of Amanda's nerves. Finally, when the clock struck 2 in the morning, it was time to act. Everything was quiet. Raphael and Luisa seemed to be asleep, and the atmosphere of the ranch was steeped in an eerie stillness. Ricardo was the first to leave the room, carrying Livia in his arms, who was still asleep. Amanda carried Carolina, who, though drowsy, seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. Eduardo, for his part, carried the bags and made sure they left no trace. Go to the car, quickly but quietly, Amanda whispered, glancing around cautiously as she slowly closed the front door. Everything seemed to be going well, too well, until Eduardo, who was leading the way, tripped over a small toolbox that had been left by the entrance. The metallic noise echoed in the silence of the night like thunder, and Amanda felt her heart stop. Hurry, she ordered, her voice barely audible as she looked toward the house, hoping no one had heard. They reached the car and began loading everything into the trunk as quickly as they could. The car engine was running, and everything was ready to go. Amanda got into the driver's seat, but just as she was about to hit the accelerator, the lights in the main house came on. Damn it! Amanda exclaimed, her pulse racing. They've seen us. From the doorway, the figure of Raphael appeared, illuminated by the porch light. His silhouette was imposing, and though he said nothing, his mere presence seemed to fill the night with threat. Where do you think you're going? He asked, his deep voice echoing in the darkness. Without wasting another second, Amanda slammed on the gas, causing the car to roar and speed down the gravel path. She could feel her heart pounding in her ears as the car raced down the winding road that led out of the ranch. Don't look back! Ricardo shouted, gripping the girls tightly. But Amanda couldn't resist glancing in the rearview mirror. Raphael's figure remained standing on the porch, watching as the car sped away. His smile, barely visible in the distance, was the last thing Amanda saw before the ranch disappeared into the darkness of the night. The car sped down the winding road that led out of the ranch. Amanda gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white from the tension. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the sound of the roaring engine seemed to match the frantic pace of her thoughts. Beside her, Ricardo clung to the girls, trying to calm them as their little eyes stared fearfully into the darkness outside. Do you think they're following us? Ricardo asked, his voice barely audible, but filled with concern. Amanda didn't respond immediately. She glanced at the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see the headlights of another vehicle chasing them. The fear that Raphael wouldn't let them escape so easily gripped her tightly. She knew what he was capable of. "I don't know, but we can't stop," she finally replied, her voice strained. "We need to get as far away as possible before they realize what we've done." Eduardo, sitting in the back seat, kept his eyes glued to the side mirror. Although he didn't say anything, his expression was a mix of fear and determination. He knew his mother was doing everything she could to keep them safe, but he also understood that the danger wasn't over yet. The gravel road turned into asphalt, and Amanda pressed the accelerator harder, trying to put as much distance as possible between them and the ranch. But just when she thought they might be safe, the headlights of another car appeared in the distance, illuminating the road behind them. "Damn it!" Amanda exclaimed, panic filling her voice. "They're following us." Raphael's car was quickly closing in, its headlights gleaming intensely like a predator stalking its prey. Ricardo turned his head to look, his face contorting into a grimace of fear. "What do we do now?" he asked, trying to stay calm for the sake of the girls, who were starting to sob in the back seat. "I'm not going to let them catch us," Amanda said, determined. She floored the accelerator, making the car roar as they picked up speed. The road ahead was dark and winding, with sharp curves and few places to maneuver. Amanda knew they couldn't run forever. Eventually, they would have to confront Raphael. But for now, all that mattered was protecting her family and staying as far away from him as possible. The car behind them continued to close in. Raphael knew the terrain well and seemed to have the upper hand on every turn they took. Amanda struggled to keep control, her sweaty hands slipping on the wheel as the car skidded dangerously on each curve. Suddenly, the road split into a fork, and Amanda saw an opportunity. "I'm going to turn left," she said quickly. "If we're lucky, we'll lose Raphael on the way." Ricardo nodded, though it was clear he wasn't convinced that would be enough. Amanda yanked the wheel sharply, taking the turn as the car skidded across the pavement. For a moment, Raphael's headlights disappeared from view. "Did it work?" Eduardo asked, his eyes wide. Amanda didn't answer immediately, her attention focused completely on the road ahead. But then, the headlights reappeared, this time closer. "No! We haven't lost him," Amanda muttered, feeling despair grow inside her. Then, something unexpected happened. As Raphael's car drew dangerously close, Amanda heard a loud noise, like the popping of a tire. She glanced in the rearview mirror just in time to see Raphael's car veer out of control, skidding violently off the road and crashing into a tree in the darkness. "Oh my God!" Ricardo exclaimed. "Did you see that?" Amanda could hardly believe what had happened. Raphael's car was stopped, wrecked, and the headlights went out completely. "Is he dead?" Eduardo asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know, but we're not staying to find out," Amanda said, pressing the accelerator again, determined to seize the chance to escape completely. The silence in the car was palpable as they left the wreck behind. No one spoke, but everyone felt the weight of what had just happened. Had they really escaped? Was it really over? With each passing mile, the tension began to ease slightly, but Amanda knew they couldn't relax just yet. Not until they were sure Raphael wouldn't come back. Finally, after what felt like endless hours of driving, they reached the main highway. The city lights appeared in the distance, like a beacon of hope drawing them toward safety. "We made it," Ricardo murmured, letting out a sigh of relief. But Amanda couldn't fully relax. There was something about the way Raphael had chased them, something about that last smile he had given her, that made her feel like this wasn't completely over. And as they drove toward the city, she knew her family would have to stay alert. Because, though they had escaped this time, deep down Amanda feared that Raphael might return to finish what he had started. The city lights seemed brighter and closer as Amanda's car approached the main highway. Relief was beginning to settle in the vehicle, but tension still hung in the air like a persistent specter. Although they had left Raphael and his wrecked car in the darkness, something inside Amanda told her this wasn't over. Ricardo held the girls tightly, trying to get them to sleep after the exhausting escape, but his eyes betrayed his own worry. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, looking at Amanda with a mix of relief and concern. Amanda nodded slightly but said nothing. Her mind was still racing, replaying every detail, every move from that fateful night. They were safe, at least for now, but she knew that, at some point, they would have to face the consequences of what had happened. "We made it," Ricardo murmured, breaking the silence, as if trying to convince himself that it was all over. Amanda let out a deep sigh but didn't respond immediately. As the city's buildings rose in front of them, a sense of security slowly began to settle, but the doubts remained. Raphael had been more than just a charming man. There was something much darker in his nature, and Amanda couldn't help but wonder what else he had hidden in his past. They finally arrived at a small motel on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe, and at that moment, that was all that mattered. Ricardo got out of the car and went to speak with the receptionist while Amanda stayed in the car, staring through the windshield, her mind lost in the recent events. The silence inside the cabin felt like a reminder of how close they had come to danger. When Ricardo returned, Amanda helped the girls out of the car. Eduardo followed, carrying the bags, and together they walked toward the motel room. The place was modest, but it provided the refuge they desperately needed. Amanda collapsed onto the bed, exhausted both physically and emotionally. "We need to call the police," Ricardo said as he closed the door, making sure it was securely locked. Amanda looked at him in silence for a few seconds, weighing his words. She knew he was right, but something inside her resisted. There was something about Raphael that made her doubt that this could all be resolved so easily. "Yes, you're right," she finally responded. "But before we do that, we need to secure the evidence. If everything we found in that house disappears or is destroyed, no one will believe us." Ricardo nodded, understanding what Amanda meant. The photos, the documents, all of it had to be handed over to the authorities, but carefully. They knew they were dealing with someone who had managed to keep a dark secret for years without anyone discovering it. Eduardo, who had been silent, finally spoke. "What happens if Raphael survives?" he asked, his voice full of uncertainty. The silence that followed was heavy. Amanda knew that was a possibility, but she also knew they couldn't live in fear forever. If Raphael survived, there would be consequences, but they had an advantage, the evidence they had gathered. "If he survives," Amanda said firmly, "he will face justice. He can't escape what he's done. But right now, the most important thing is to protect ourselves and make sure nothing we found is lost." The family stayed awake through the night, fearful that somehow Raphael might show up at the door, but nothing happened. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, Amanda, exhausted, decided it was time to act. That morning, after making sure the girls were safe with Ricardo, Amanda and Eduardo went to the nearest police station. With their hearts racing, they walked in and approached the officer on duty. They calmly explained what had happened, handing over the photos they had taken of the documents and explaining the truth about Raphael's ranch. The process was long, filled with questions, but eventually, the police began investigating. Amanda knew she had done the right thing, but still, part of her couldn't shake a deep sense of unease. Days later, the news came. Raphael had survived the accident, but he was severely injured and had been arrested at the hospital where he was treated. Authorities had found evidence of his crimes, years of scams, deceptions, and the disappearances of several families who had stayed at his ranch. The same families Amanda had seen in the photos. When the news reached Amanda, she felt a mix of relief and justice. Finally, Raphael would face the consequences of his actions. Her family was safe, and what they had gone through wouldn't be lost in silence like it had with other victims. However, as she sat on the balcony of the small apartment they had rented temporarily, watching Ricardo and the girls play, Amanda couldn't help but think about how close they had been to danger. She knew that, although Raphael's chapter had closed, the emotional scars from that experience would take much longer to heal. But, for the first time in days, Amanda allowed herself to relax. The sun shone brightly on the horizon, and although the shadows of the past were still present, there was a new beginning for her family. Raphael no longer posed a threat, and while the darkness of his deception had left an indelible mark on their lives, it had also taught them a valuable lesson: never underestimate your instincts or be fooled by appearances. And so, with a deep sigh of relief, Amanda decided it was time to leave the past behind and look toward the future, knowing that, no matter what, her family would always stay together.